Perfect. Okay. So, good morning. Thank you for joining us for today's ADOS KC meetup. Today is our first book club discussion. We are going through From Here to Equality by William Darity and Kirsten Mullen. It is a guide to reparations for Black Americans in the 21st century. And it is a lot to unpack. So once again, thank you so much for joining us today. We are at Equal Minded. If you can hear the smoothing machine in the background, that's what that noise is. And we are going to get started. We're going chapter by chapter in the book. So if you have read the book, feel free to leave comments about as we share. If anything inspires you, if you want to add any of your thoughts on it, please feel free. And let's get started. Let me make sure we're all in the view here. Okay. So let's just get into it. So with in chapter 1, and also if you are in the chat, you can just raise your hand, and I'll know to call on you in the order of which you raise your hand. So let's get started. So chapter 1. Does anyone want to put in any notes on chapter 1? I know Julian had raised his hand. Do you want to start, Julian? Okay, well, I guess not. Okay, well, does anyone else want to start with chapter 1? Any notes that they have on it? All right, well, then I'll go. So, the first thing I made a note of was on page 11. And when I say page 11, I was reading the digital version of the book. I know some of us have the hard copy of it. So in the digital version, the page that I first wrote on was in page 11, and it says, when Frederick Douglass initially broke from the radical wing Republicans in disagreement with free Black Americans receiving former Confederate land, do you think that helped block or delay the beginning developments of reparations after the Civil War?
Thank you very much.
Is that an open question?
Yes, I'm sorry, yes it was. This was an open question. I was asking, when Frederick Douglass initially broke from the radical wing Republicans in disagreement with free Black Americans receiving former Confederate land, do you think that helped block or delay the beginning developments of reparations after the Civil War? As in, do you think his anti-land to Black Americans was the reason why it was delayed? All right, Alvonia, go ahead.
I don't think Douglas's opinion, which he later changed, had any bearing. They just never paid on. The whole Reconstruction was a catastrophe because, again, it was mass homelessness, illiteracy. A lot of people died from just starvation. It was just the climate of that time. They just didn't want to pay us. They did not want to move our status economically up. So whether he broke from the radical Republicans or not, public opinion at the time towards Blacks was just despicable. So that's all. I don't think it had any bearing. But I know he later regret, his stance and changed his opinion on, because the overall theme is land, the ability to make money, and protection, which in education, that's something that basically something that would have guaranteed economic growth, but it was denied us. So no.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the time was, I mean, I don't know if the time has arisen at all, but I don't think it was just too inflamed. I mean, somewhat similar to how I feel like things are right now, but it was just very, very inflamed. And yeah, I don't know if his stance did it one way or the other.
I'd like to add something. And here's a disclaimer. Hey guys, I've been real busy, so I haven't been able to read the book, but was for sure gonna be here so I can hear some good stuff that was in it. I just read something the other day, and it was actually a field call. 40 Acres and a Mule was actually a field call made by the Republican general at the time during the Civil War, and he stated that he's the one that made that call. It wasn't even a presidential decree. It was a field call by a Republican general, and he said that all the freed slaves should be allotted 40 acres and a mule. Now, from my understanding, from what I read, it was Andrew Jackson that was opposed to land ownership for blacks, even though that he let the whites get their land back after Civil War. All the land that was taken from whites during the Civil War, they got it back after the Civil War. But Andrew Jackson didn't think that that was the right path for African descendants of slaves. He chose wage slavery. So basically, we just went from a forced servitude to wage slavery, because Andrew Jackson, instead of wanting to give us the land, like everybody is eloquently said, equals to money, he just forced us to be in, paid. Wage slavery. You get paid enough to live and eat, not enough to prosper. So we just moved from a forced servitude to a wage slavery, and it was Andrew Jackson's fault and his call.
Go ahead, Ronnie, if you want to jump in.
Just to piggyback off Antoine, from what I've never heard this about Johnson, but from what he was saying, and Dr. Darity brought it up, Johnson did have a hate for the plantar class, but he hated blacks more. He was a white Southerner, so basically he was a racist. They never said that in any history books, and it was his actions that really ushered in the black code. So his direct legislation that he did set the stage for white supremacy. And that's just to piggyback on what Antoine said. That's all.
I guess that's why and I'm naive about it too. I was naive. I just heard a lot of stuff about the forefathers are coming out this year, and I'm glad it is, because I just found that out about Andrew Jackson too. I guess that's why we're trying to take his statue from in front of Kansas City's courthouse.
All right, Julian, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the brother and the sister got it right about Andrew Johnson, who was the Lincoln's vice president, and he had been the governor of Tennessee, and he was the first of the Confederates to accept admission back into the Union. After they got rid of Lincoln, Johnson basically caved into all the demands of the Southerners. And I just wanted to put that in there. I haven't read the book. I've been keeping up with it. I haven't gotten my hands on it yet. But thanks for holding this session and inviting me. I'm here. I'm speaking from Los Angeles, in case you'd like to know. Okay.
All right, let's move on. Does anyone have any other notes or anything they want to add from the first 10 pages of the book?
I'm just going to add that I listened to the book rather than read it. And I didn't listen to the whole thing. I listened to like the first 3 chapters and then the last 2 chapters. Just so I don't have any references of, of pages or anything. I mean, it's no big deal, but I did listen rather than read parts of the book. And it's a great audiobook.
Yeah, I did too. I listened to the audio version of the book, which is why I think my page number references are going to be a little bit off from those who have the actual physical copy. But we're going to get through it anyway, so it's all good. The next note I made in the book was on the digital pages 12 through 14, and it's another open-ended question. Were you aware of how many historical instances of ADOS seeking reparations were endeavored before the 21st century? So, to clarify, when I was reading,
I can't hear you, Kira.
I know there's a smoothie machine going on behind me. Hold on. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Good. Okay. So, in the digital pages of 12 through 14, there's like several examples of ADOS seeking reparations after the Civil War. And I'd like for us to go through them. Were you aware of them? What do you think? What are your opinions? And let's go. Oh, and we're still in chapter 1.
I wasn't personally aware. I'm not personally aware of all the instances where we've advocated for reparations as ADOS. I do. My earliest recollection of reparations, or reference to reparations, will probably be Spike Lee's. And I'm sorry, but I'm being truthful. Will probably be Spike Lee and his production company. It was called 40 Acres and a Mule, and that was probably my first introduction, into reparations. Because, after, wondering, what's 40 Acres and a Mule? Then I, learned that was actually reparations. But I've never heard of any concerted effort, for, reparations. Not at all. Not at all. I've heard it thrown up, but I've not heard it as a concerted effort or concerted demand, by us. So I guess, in my opinion, it never has been brought up, seriously enough for us to, make it an issue that we're going to vote on. And I think, I've been voting for a while, and I think this is probably the first election to where I can really say that reparations has been, brought to the forefront, as an issue. And it's really not, that much of a big as an issue as it's supposed to be. It's still on the outskirts, but it's bigger though.
Go ahead, Logan.
I think the efforts of Callie, I'm sorry, y'all. I think the efforts of Callie House needs to be acknowledged. She predated Garvey. Once the government neutralized what she had going on, a lot of her members joined Marcus Garvey's group, and her story is told on page 11. And this was Her pension program was the MRPB. I've never heard of all these different people that attempted to get reparations, but the underlying theme is they were neutralized and not able to continue on. They were blocked in the courts and stuff like that. House ended up being convicted of a crime and going to prison. And her, she wanted to help ex-slaves, pensions, stuff like that. And again, she was neutralized. I've never heard of her until I read the book. And I just think her efforts needs to be noted. Sorry about that. I have a cold.
I think going after what Antoine said, the only reference I did have of reparations was 40 Acres and a Mule from Spike Lee. But I didn't know it as reparations. I just knew it as his film production company. I guess I was kind of ignorant in that way that I never thought to ever question, like, oh, like, what does that really mean? Like, when he says 40 Acres and a Mule, and you see the stamp or the brand, like what is that about? Like, I never researched it before, which is kind of like, I guess, on my end, not really doing my due diligence and kind of questioning what that was. But I was aware of that. Ammonia?
For me, just through reading, I knew we had grievances, but I never understood to the full extent. You would hear stories, bits in here, family oral traditions, stuff like that. Again, my parents are from the Jim Crow South. Both were born in the 30s. So you have oral traditions and stuff like that. But as far as reparations, it was a foreign concept. Somewhere in the 80s, no, it had to be the 90s. Somebody did a story about John Connor, the guy who kept, the originator of HR 40. That was it. And of course, like you guys said, Spike Lee's, but I never really thought the seriousness of the claim, not until I heard something from Claude Anderson, and he mentioned there is specific legislations for Blacks, but it's not enforced. And he mentioned the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment. I was like, oh, what? So again, you've heard of it, but for me, I never really considered the implications and what it was for and what it would do. That's it. That's all I have.
Well, it wasn't in my history books for sure. And I feel like in the 80s is kind of when maybe when Jesse Jackson was running for president, I started hearing about it. Never, and I'm like a longtime Democrat, whatever that means, but I mean, I'm a Democrat, and it does seem to get raised in presidentials maybe, or in some sort of races that elections that it comes up, but then nothing. So I so appreciate being here and having the opportunity to read the book, because I've talked about it with other people and they're like, how do we implement it? And I was grateful to be able to read the chapters about, okay, well, here are the serious proposals about it and what it would cost and what what it would look like. So I appreciate that.
I know back home, so I want to say probably Spike Lee was probably the first time. Well, I take that back. It wasn't the first time I heard of 40 Acres and a Mule. So I don't know if everybody knows it, but I'm originally from Louisiana. I've been here in Kansas City for about 6 to 7 years, so I kind of feel like the cultures are really different. But I remember hearing joking like my great uncles and my great aunts, they would always make the joke about, man, the show would have been nice to get through reparations. Because my grandmother actually picked cotton, and we would always have all these conversations about, when she was growing up, what she went through, what she experienced. Like, I don't know, most people know, but Bonnie and Clyde actually died in a place called Arcadia, Louisiana, and she was actually picking cotton the day they got murdered. And so they would always talk about, shot they would always talk about, how much of a need it was. And they spoke of it in a manner of like a fantasy. Like, man, if we just had the 40 acres and a mule back then, we would have been okay. So that's when I kind of started doing my, like, what is this reparations? Why 40 acres and a mule? What does that mean? And that's kind of something I used to say when I talk about what we're trying to do as a group. It's not 40 acres and a mule in 2020. That's not what it looks like. But when you look at our black agenda and you look at the things that we have planned out, that's 40 acres and a mule of 2020.
All right, Julian, you want to add something?
Yes, it sounds like you are talking about how you first heard of reparations. And I just wanted to throw my history with that into the discussion. So, yeah, I actually think I really started hearing about it around in '88, around when Jesse was running. I was in Atlanta at that time. And I've probably gotten some note of it before because I'd been actively studying what was going on with the civil rights movement, all through the 70s and the 80s. And I recall my first exposure to the word concerned reparations was defined as a nation that started war on another nation unfairly and destroyed that nation, then the nation that started the war could be sued for reparations. And I think that definition came over into slavery. Looking back in the history, because there was a claim right after emancipation, after the war ended. But I haven't seen any documentation that it was titled reparations. And the 40 acres and a mule, like Antoine had said, it really struck me when Spike Lee named his company that, because it recognized the position of Black Americans in society as unique from any other group in American society. And to put that on an entertainment international platform, I thought was a brilliant move and a very comforting move. So seeing Dr. Darity's book and having been familiar with Tone Talks and Yarnell, Yvette, Yvette. Just recently this year, I came into contact with all of them, and I'm just very impressed that they have solidified the concept into a political platform, which I don't think had happened before. And the Conyers bill was basically to study reparations, and over like 20 sessions of Congress, they'd bring it up and put it back on the table. So to see this kind of forward motion now is very heartening to me. So thank you.
Well, speaking of bills, let's talk about HR 40 because that was actually the next point I made a note of in the book. So on pages 15 through 16 in the digital version of the book, I picked up on the Oklahoma Commission to Study the Tulsa Riot of 1921 and how that compares to the H.R. 40 congressional bill to study reparations. And then a second part to the question I have is, in what ways will recommended edits make a difference? And then the second question to that is, what could or will happen if those edits aren't made before the bill is moved on? This is HR 40, and I'm asking how it relates to the Oklahoma Commission to study the Tulsa riots of 1921. I'm asking how will edits recommended by William Darity make a difference? And I'm asking what will happen if those edits aren't made? So I guess those 3 questions.
I think I know one of the earliest. Do you want to give them the order that you asked?
Whatever.
Okay. Excuse me. Based on what I know about HR 40 and what I've read, it's very, very harmless. And like one of the main things, the first things that I noticed is when you look at other bills of those statutes, like it talks a lot about putting things in context. So I look at, okay, if we have HR 40 that's supposed to detail reparations for our group of people, for our community, I looked at other bills that were similar, i.e., the reparations for Jewish people, i.e., reparations for Japanese Americans, i.e., I also looked at in Somalia, well not in Somalia, in Minneapolis, it's a sanctuary city for Somali refugees. That's where Ilhan Omar, I think I'm pronouncing it right, that's where she's the mayor of whatever elected official position she has.
Congress.
Yeah, representative. So she, I was looking at those bills, so in all of these bills, they detail in a specific way who they're talking about. Like they will say Somali refugees or descendants of Jewish Americans or Japanese, descendants of Japanese victims of the internment camps. It's very, 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 very specific. And I think that's one thing I push in a lot of conversations that I have. That bill is not specific. It's not even law. It basically, for the most part, and I'm generalizing the hell out of it, but it is a bill to study the case for reparations. I personally feel like all the work that we've done in terms of how do we quantify that number? What is reparations? What does it look like? Because a lot of times, like, you hear people say, okay, well, we need to defund police or we need police reform. A lot of people say that. What the hell does that look like? Like, if I was to do police reform, how would it look? And so when I look at all of our jobs guarantees and the jobs guarantees, as well as the cash payments, as well as, mass incarceration, as well as set asides, like women's therapy, all the things that we have on our black agenda is very specific. And I feel like if we can get those things incorporated into HR 40 or a bill similar to HR 40, the end point will essentially be, okay, well, we have a commission to study this. And they'll kick that can down the road for another 30 minutes. Like, okay, now we're studying reparations, what more do you want us to do? But the issue is, I can tell you what all it is. And I can prove it with government documents, with the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, with the IRS microdata, with home ownership rates, with the amount of black Americans, the percentage of black Americans that got X amount of dollars for SBA loans. Like, we can go back and prove all of these things from the highest levels of government. We don't need you to study HR 40. We did that. We don't need you to study reparations. We did that. Now, if we want to do anything, we should have a sit down where we discuss what's pertinent and what's not. But I feel like if we don't, like, to me, when people say they support HR 40, they don't say shit. Because most people think, oh, that's reparations. No, it's not. And most people think that have never read that or read anything in comparison. And that's an argument I get into a lot. Because it's like, oh, we have this. They don't work though. Because that's the same shit that was 20 years ago. It just sounds good. Like, it has to be specific and it has to be transformational. If it's not drastic, it won't fix the problem. because the wealth transfer is happening. We know that currently. We know that, baby boomers are dying. You know the black wealth is plummeting. So if we don't get it fixed, it will be a problem. There's no ifs. If we don't get drastic transformational policy, we will all be homeless, basically.
So can I ask a question? Point of clarification. So HR 40 is the resolution to create a commission study the issue.
Yeah.
And so Sandy's edits are basically Chapter 12 edits, or are they edits specifically that direct how the study should progress?
Well, see, I think Sandy's, from what Sandy speaks on, from what I've read, is kind of independent. Because HR 40 is a thing in itself. And who was that? Was that Clyburn that introduced HR 40 way back whenever? You know, that
in the 1880s, right?
Yeah, it's a whole bill.
Yeah.
Like, we can't expect a bill from that long ago to fix problems of a whole new generation.
And it was recently, and was it NARC and Cobra that updated it to include them getting a salary to conduct the study.
Yeah.
And that was
I think that was NARC. I don't think it was in Cobra.
NARC? Yeah. So that was in 2018, 2019?
Yeah, that's been recently. And so basically what they're trying to get there is, okay, I'll pay you $200,000 to study this.
Yeah.
I don't need you to study this, because 9 times out of 10, you're just going to collect your salary until you find another.
Yeah.
I need you to come in here now. Certain things I think should be paid for, like room, board, maybe meals, some type of per diem to eat.
Yeah.
That's fine. I have no problem with that. But if you think you're going to benefit, there is no, and this is how I feel, there is no benefit in fighting for black people initially.
Yeah.
So the people that are going to take these positions to do this study, 9 times out of 10 aren't going to benefit from it. Or they'll try to find a way in to benefit, like removing the ADOS barrier. Because if you're getting to that position and you're studying it, we know most of the black people that are in those positions are not ADOS people.
Yeah.
So if I'm studying, I'm not going to fight for black immigrants to receive reparations, because they shouldn't. Because they don't need to be repaired in the same way we need to be. And so from my understanding, if they get that position, it can't be a payment. And the whole, to me, HR 40, not that I think we should throw it out, but we can't use that as a source of, this is what we need to go for. Because it's really old. It's basically saying we need to get 40 acres in the mule.
So what are the edits that are?
You can get my room.
It's very, and like I said, I'm not sure this angle with it, but from what I hear Yvette speak of, it's the specificity. Because HR 40 is very general.
Yeah.
And I think Darity, for what I've heard Yvette speak on Darity specifically, has been more so, like we always talk about, you have to be specific in terms of the community. So you have to make ADOS a thing.
Yeah.
Because without that, understand where the issue is the lineage. It's not catching the cat. This is systemically happening to this group of people for over 400 years. Mm-hmm. And the only way to fix that, you can't fix that by including other groups of people. And then you have to bring in all of the, like, what do you call it, witnesses. And to me, that's black home ownership, black wealth, and you cross-check that with education. Because what most people say, well, if you got educated, then you would have these problems. But we found out that even with the degree, the starting salaries between ADOS people and, let's just say, white people as a measure, the starting salaries are $5,000 less. And that's at the beginning. So over the course of a career, I think it was like $2-3 million that, people with the same qualifications, same work ethic and all that will make more. So you have to use that to prove the point. Like here we have an educated black man, no priors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Over the course of his career, he did this. And you compare that to the white comparison. Over the course of his career, he did that. So that's your measuring stick. And now we say because of this system, like affirmative action, we put this in to fix this problem, it didn't work. So even with Obamacare, something like that, well, this benefit black people. Yeah, this benefit everybody though. Like it's not reparations if it includes anybody else. Right. Because nobody needs to be repaired. And for the people that were mistreated, for the people that were, oppressed, if that's where you come from, and you come from a place of oppression, you have to take that up with the people that oppressed you. Jamaicans can't get their reparations in America. Yeah. Just like I can't get reparations in Jamaica. I don't have any lineage there. So I think those are the measuring sticks from how I understand it.
That's what there is. That's HR 40.
Exactly. Right. That's what I think.
I think to answer your question, after NARC put in the provision that they should get a salary is when I think that's when he made his edits to say, no, this HR 40 is turning into something, it's turning into a cash grab for this group. So that's when he made his edits.
Right.
All right. We'll have, I think, Antoine and then Alonian. So Antoine, if you want to, or did you have anything you want to add? Not. All right. Alonian, go ahead.
Thank you. Well, from what I read, what Darity wrote, I never could figure out what were the flaws, but just reading through what he was saying, starting on page 260, wait a minute, starting on pages where he spoke about it, he spoke about who would qualify. Then he went on to say he suggested a 12-member reparations supervisory board who would then elect trustees. He also suggested a National Reparations Bureau who would manage and execute the program. And he also added an educational component that would last like 99 years. So just like the Never Forget program that the Holocaust survivors, initiated about what happened. But as far as the flaws, that's a question that I have. But I don't think the bill was written in '89, so that's all I have.
Yeah, I could barely hear Brian and y'all there. But I wanted to say something about HR 40 and these commissions. And one of the gentlemen, I'm sorry I can't refer to him by name, he said that we've had 27 Congress where they study reparations in some type of form. I wouldn't have any problem with HR 40 if it was studying how we was going to pay out reparations. From my understanding, in this HR 40 is trying to study why, and why is a foregone conclusion. So I don't want no commissions trying to say we know why. Now, if this commission was gathered, okay, well, we need a commission so we know how to dole out all this money. Then then it would be different. And plus, I think added to reparations is two parts. It's financial and it's legislation. Do they have to come at the same time? Yeah. But I mean, yes, I think we should get both of them at the same time, but it's two parts. Parts of it is some parts of reparations are financial and some parts are legislation. Now that legislation depends on, where you are, in the ADOS spectrum, and is because if your goal is sovereignty, then legislation doesn't mean that much to you. But if your goal, as a reparationist is assimilation, well, maybe not assimilation, but cohabitation, then that legislation means something to you. My personal beliefs beside. But yeah, it's financial and legislative. But the legislative parts of it, it might not mean too much to somebody that's saying I'm not leaving here until I get recompensed for what my ancestors went through, and then I'll leave. So the legislation doesn't mean that much to that type of person, so it just depends on what because a lot of people, like I'm gonna just say a lot of people like me, I wouldn't have no problems with leaving this country, but I'm not gonna leave it until I get paid for what my ancestors went through, because they left blood, shed, and tears on this soil, and I ain't leaving until I get paid for it. So for somebody, you know, with that type of mindset, they might not care about the legislation, because once they get paid, they're gonna try to start their life somewhere else, you know, in another country that ain't basically damned. But that's just my opinion.
I'm gonna jump back in. So we have two people just doing this. Stephen, welcome, and we have Chris behind us. Welcome. We are in the middle of a discussion about ADOS, reparations. I forget. Actually, we're putting over here too, so I can talk here. From here to equality, we're in the middle of the book discussion, and the last thing that I want to talk about with chapter 1 is once we got to the end of that chapter, we really had an idea of how fervently the Democratic Party has historically worked against us, Black Americans, ADOS. So my last question for this chapter is, why now do Black Americans vote blue? How did we go from identifying with the radical Republicans to now, I think it's like 85% Democratic? How did that, why is that? How did that happen?
I'll take it.
This is no.
Go ahead.
Avonia, she raised her hand. Go ahead, Avonia.
Okay, what happened was Lincoln was originally with the Whig Party. Okay, the Whig Party ended around the time the Republican Party was started to stop the spread of slavery to the West. Okay, the Democratic Party ended up splitting in two, the Northern fraction and the Southern fraction. I can't remember what chapter, but that had a huge impact. So it had to be around the time the radical Republicans, the Republican Party started. So it had to be around the time of Lincoln's rise into the political ring as being the leader of the Republican Party. So the Republican Party started, the Whig Party ended, and the Democrats split into a Northern fraction and the Southern fraction. And again, the Southern Democrats, remember, we knew when the South lost the Democrats. Lyndon B. Johnson told us that with that Civil Rights Bill of '68, we're going to lose, the Democrats going to lose the South. But anyway, the parties ended up flip-flopping, and I think the one thing we need to keep in the forefront of our minds, it was the Democrats of the South that started that reign of terror, you know, that, you know, started immediately after the Civil War, after Reconstruction and the removal of the troops. But we were never protected in the first place. We were never protected in the first place. That's all I have.
Well, because I thought that for one period of time that we were Republican before we made the switch to Democrat. And I know that was around the time, like you said, when Lincoln was on the rise for the Emancipation Proclamation. I don't know personally whether we were Democrat or Republican back then, but I know at one point, for the most part, we voted Republican, and then there was a switch to the Democratic Party. Was that during that time?
Give me a second. I'm gonna find the page in the book that explains it. Darity even covered that. And I want to say that I took the U.S. Civil War at a Jesuit university, and I feel robbed. So what I'm gonna do right now, I'm looking for the page that explains that, okay? Give me a second. Sorry about that.
Okay, take your time.
I wanted to comment, I'm sorry, everybody. I wanted to comment, you know, on what solidifies that, on what keeps ADOS Americans voting Democratic. And from what I see it's the labor unions and the churches that came in after what you guys are talking about that basically shepherd, and urged us, kept us into these Democratic parties, labor unions. Yes, the labor unions, yes. I know that they're supposed to be benign and everything, but yes, they kept us voting Democrat. And our churches did. Our churches did too. A lot of our churches usher, people, to the Democrats. And they might not preach it, but they usher us to them. And those are the two entities that for at least the last 40 or 50 years have been keeping blacks voting Democratic.
Go ahead, Bonnie.
You muted. Did she hear me? Alvona, you on mute.
Sorry about that. It's on page 147, Radicals and Rebels, and it talks about the Kansas-Nebraska Act and the Fugitive Slave Act and what it meant. And of course, you know about Bleeding Kansas. Kansas came in the Union in 61 as a free state. Missouri entered in 21 as a slave state when Maine came in as the free state. But what happened before passage of the two acts, the two main political parties were the Democrats, largely Southerners, and the Whigs, largely Northerners. Neither party survived the turmoil. The Democrats split into Northern and Southern fractions, and the Whigs were replaced by the newly constituted anti-slavery Republican Party, emerging with Abraham Lincoln leading their ticket. And so all of this had to be around 1860, 61.
Okay.
All right, I'm not sure who raised their hand first, whether it's Julian or Antoine.
All right, I'm not sure who raised their hand first, but was it Julian or Antoine? But since
I stated my piece already.
okay, all right, Julian, if you have anything you want to say.
Okay, goodness, that I lost. Oh yeah, the Democrats and the Republicans saying, yeah, that's pretty much persisted after the Civil War, the way Ronia described it. And by the time I came around, the Democrats were basically called the Dixiecrats, and in the 1960s, and they were very much trying to hold on to segregation during the time that Dr. King was protesting for integration. And so the Democrats basically took Dr. King's lead, followed his lead, and the Republicans followed Barry Goldwater's lead, who was Johnson's opponent after Kennedy died. And they were very, the divide between the idea of conservative and liberal became party associated, because before there were conservatives and liberals in both parties. But the more it lined up on a racial basis, the Democrats became associated with liberal and Republicans became associated with conservative. And that's where we are today. And so the modern divide is very much based on the Democratic promise to support Black equality during the 60s. But it broke apart pretty much like Lincoln's Reconstruction after but on the opposite, on the flip-flop. This time it broke apart because the Republicans refused to support Black identity and Black sovereignty, as could be said. So that's where we are. For we're like 40 years, 50 years trying to get the Democrats to uphold their promise, but they allowed themselves to be sabotaged by Republican talking points and programs such as Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton with the Predator spiel during the 90s. That was a result of the Republican sabotage. It's like they had to do that for the Republicans to go along with anything else they did. So I don't know if, like right now, if Biden is conscious of that, he needs to make a hard change for that. But the strategy to vote down ballot, meaning to vote for your local and statewide offices, understand what's going on there. But when you cast your ballot, do cast your ballot, but leave the presidency and vice presidency blank. Unless by that time we vote, they have addressed our particular situation as ADOS for a transformative agenda. So that's all I can add right now. Thank you.
In June.
All right, Brian.
I just want to jump in support of Al Bunyan's comments about the Slave Act, and specifically the piece or the point on page 147 that he was drawn out of how neither the Democratic Party nor the Whig Party survived essentially the Fugitive Slave Act or the Civil War in and of itself. And I think it's fascinating as someone who believes in the cyclicality of history in any developed society, that's where we are now. I don't personally believe that either the Republican Party or the Democratic Party is going to survive in form past this fight at this moment. So I want to reiterate, I'm really glad that I'll make that point because I think it really resonates right now.
All right, so that's the end of chapter 1. Does anyone have any notes, anything they want to say about chapter 2?
I think that I could not hear you for some reason.
Oh, we're now moving on to chapter 2. If anyone has any notes or anything they want to say about chapter 2, let's get started on chapter 2. But I gotta say, I'll start with a very quick comment. I read through chapter 2, but I did not take any notes on it for some reason, so I'm not sure if anything in particular just didn't stand out to me enough to write down notes on it, but yeah. No, okay, moving on to chapter 3. Does anyone have anything they want to say about chapter 3? Go ahead, Aurelia.
Oh no, I was gonna comment on chapter 2. About a quick summary. It just talked about the 3 tiered injustices: slavery, Jim Crow, and racial inequality and discrimination. That's basically was the case for reparations. And then when we got to, that's it. I'll wait for the summary of chapter 3. That's all I have about 2. I'm sorry. I was reading the notes that I took. Sorry about that.
We talk about basically how slavery continued. And
Like Albania was saying, it's 3 parts. Do I need to mute? Okay. my question is, how educated do you think our community is on after Emancipation Proclamation? We basically have a continuation of the same thing. I don't think most of us understand that after the Emancipation Proclamation, you have vagrancy laws, you have black codes, you have peonage, you have convict leasing, you have redlining, all these other different institutions that essentially do the same thing. Like we talked about earlier, the slaves were free, but essentially we were just getting paid enough to eat and have a place to live. And I think that could possibly be the missing link between how we connect to our past. Because now, as far as I'm concerned, that's all we doing now. We have just enough money to eat and have a half place to live and have just enough money to get us back to work, to build wealth for, other communities. Is that something that y'all think is understood amongst our community, in first and foremost, and then amongst the nation? Because I feel like, it's one thing to educate our own people, but then to America as a whole, like, this isn't any different. Like, we get shot in the face now. Like, no, we're no longer hung for trees, but children aren't safe to play.
Yes, we are.
You know what I'm saying? Oh, yeah, you're right. You're right. Touche.
Yeah.
Touche. My bad.
They
Totally forgot about
it. They call it suicide now.
Yeah. And then they wind up with all their organs missing and stuff with newspapers. Yeah. So, yeah, that's the question I would like to pose to the group.
Go ahead, Alvonian.
Well, I have to agree. I think the ignorance in our community, even my own ignorance, as far as the injustices that were committed on us, I did not know that our grievance and our claim was just that humongous. It's amazing, again, the audacity of the United States not to pay the debt. That's what's amazing me. But when slavery ended in 1865, it was just overall illiteracy. And those were the things that plague us today: illiteracy. We don't own anything, no land ownership, we don't own anything, and lack of protection. These three overriding things are prevalent in today's society. And when you speak with fellow ADOS people about reparations, it's either they don't want to know, or the system is rigged against us, but they have that overall disenfranchisement of nothing's never going to change. They're not going to pay us. And that's like the resounding echo that I hear from most Blacks. They're not going to pay us. Yeah, they did that, but they're not going to pay us. I think we need to get the word out in our Black communities. Exactly what's going on, what it means, and what it will do for us overall. I think we need to get the word out. I feel if more people knew, if they were educated on the why, they'll have faith in, the how. We can get this done. And I'm just saying, I think we need an education program just to get the word out about reparations and the ADOS claim for reparative justice.
And something I want to add to that, Alvoni, because this is something I have to not only tell myself constantly, because I run into the same thing. And I'll tell y'all, I'm probably the most radical brother here, to be totally honest. And I when I have these conversations, whether it's with people in my generation, people younger than me, or people older than me, I have to constantly remind myself, because when I hear they ain't gonna never give it to us, I hear you scared. And if you scared, you got to stay at home. Because I ain't scared, and we're gonna have to fight, and it's gonna take a whole hell of a lot of fighting. So if you ain't ready to fight, you might need to stay at home. But I also have to keep in mind something Yvette talks about a lot of, and something that once I did the research, I actually came to the understanding of. When you look at the Civil Rights Act of the 60s, and we look at the Black Panther movements, that wasn't everybody. People didn't like Malcolm and Martin when they was alive. It wasn't, matter of fact, more people didn't like them than people that did. So we have to keep that in mind as well. So when you're having these conversations and we fighting for reparations and we fighting to get our message out, understand when we got the Civil Rights Act of the 60s, most people didn't like us. Most people wasn't with the movement. So all we really need is a critical mass, because if you let me tell it, most of these people are sheep anyway. And they just gonna go with what's popular anyway. So we just gotta keep the fight. So we gotta stay encouraged and we just gotta keep going. Because it ain't gonna change if we don't change. That's how I
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man, I didn't know I was unmuted all that time. Sorry. Yeah, man, I'm with you. I'm with you, bro. I'm with you, brother Scott, man. But I think, I think a lot of, black people have felt more empowered. I know how we feel about how some elements have hijacked have tried to hijack the conversation, and they have infiltrated, BLM. But, at the same time, I think that, those marches, I see a lot of young black people feeling empowered. So, people that are empowered, they have less fear of fighting. So, that's what gives me hope. You know what I mean? And a lot of the pushback we get, from, reparations, that defeatist attitude, got to do with complacency. Complacency, you defeat yourself when you're complacent. People ain't complacent no more, man. I see people being non-complacent, you know what I mean, and being non-conformist. So I mean, this is the time to push, and I think people were really receptive towards ADOS. I did have a lady that I gave my card to, and I was talking to her about the campaign, and yeah, she was an ADOS lady. And as soon as I said something about me being an ADOS candidate, she was like, oh no. But that only happened to me once. But I said it did. You know what I mean? It did happen, but it only happened to me once. But most people who I talk to, especially ADOS folks, they're really receptive to the idea of reparations, if for the sake to just for people to stop talking about it. I don't care why people support it. We gonna keep talking about it until y'all tired of hearing about it. And y'all gonna do something. That's my thoughts on it.
I just want you guys to know my sister Deb Ellis, she's here she's here and she's listening, but she's off camera. I just want y'all to know she's participating and I'm speaking for us both. So she's here, Kiara, and to the rest of y'all, she says good morning. That's all.
Yeah, we were wondering where Mama Dad today, but I lined y'all together. But I knew,
Just the feedback, man. I'm good. I had my speaker on.
So I do want to say, Lindsay, you made a very good point. A lot of people don't like the idea of reparations, and it's been talked about quite a bit among ADOS, and we see it practically every time we engage with anybody. As we call them, the sassy blue checks, a lot of people have made it their business to be against reparations, specifically to be against Black Americans getting any type of uplift that would enable them to be self-sufficient, to be truly economically empowered.
Even Black.
Yeah. So I think when you consider that, it makes sense why we get so much pushback. There's lots of people who, that's their paycheck, that's their bread and butter, us being a bottom cast. They don't want, they'd be out of a job if we got reparations.
Man. Yeah. But this is the wild thing to me. And this is how I understand
I feel like giving Black Americans reparations or giving ADOS America reparations, that progresses the nation. because our whole talent pool, and this is something I have been looking at over, as I review history and do my read, we created all of this shit. Like for real, for real. So it's like the more, like when we think about like the cotton gin and cell phones and street lights and gravel and everything that makes America, America, we built. So feeding into that and investing into that is going to better America, because as we've shown when we look at the statistics, we do business with everybody. Like everybody benefits when we're doing good. So, and I know that's going to be a hard thing to pass to America, but I think that's something we have to keep in mind. Like, understand we built all of it, like all of it. There was no here to come to before we got here. And everybody's over here because of what we built. So that's something I have to keep in mind. I ain't gonna lie, y'all, it get tired. Like, you be arguing with people like, how you fighting against me and I'm fighting for us? But that's a part of it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Scott.
I think Amy had her hand raised up. Amy, did you want to say something?
No, I didn't. I'm just listening. I didn't have anything to say.
Okay. Aronia, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I just wanted to
Hold
back off what
before you start, welcome Kimberly, welcome to our chat. We're on chapter 2 From Here to Equality. Welcome. All right, go ahead, sorry.
Oh, well, my comment was the middle class is built on that bottom marginalized class, all the social services and all the policing, and I guess the middle class is built on that bottom black caste. Again, that's, as Kiara said, yeah, if we got reparations, a lot of people would lose their jobs, so I'm just piggybacking off that sentiment. That's all I have.
Yeah, I wanted to say that anybody, well, I know Brother Scott probably touched on it, but we talk about reparations for everybody else and not for us. And man, racism couldn't be more blatant than there. We send billions of dollars over to Israel every year, for some, had no fault in. If you look at what Germany, did to the Jews, it wasn't like America did that themselves, but they support the state.
Intron, you close it.
Not give rest makes the blatant so blatant. I'm sorry, but I just wanted to make this point. And whenever because white supremacists, they got tactics, and one of their tactics, we've all been called racist because we want to represent our own, but we got AIPAC. What's the difference between ADOS and AIPAC? Nothing. Our color. That's it. Our color. That's it. The only difference between ADOS and AIPAC is our color, and we don't have any money. But and then you get labeled anti-Semite, you know what I mean? But you're just using it as an example. You just using it as an example. You're paying this country billions of dollars every year for something you haven't even done, and you're not paying Black Americans recompense for something that you did do. And if you bring that up, you know what I mean, you get called an anti-Semite. But I think I'm ranting. Let me be quiet.
Does anyone have any other notes they want to add for chapter 2? If not, let's move on to chapter 3. If anyone wants to start in on chapter 3, feel free. You're good, Algonia. Go ahead.
It just talked about how slavery was embedded in every fabric of society, and basically how it mushroomed into being this it was a global powerhouse. It's just, I'm talking about slavery as an entity. Not only did it build our nation, then it talked about how the universities and everything was just, I don't even think the chapter is about who benefited from slavery. And it went on to show how the laws, I think this is the one when they start passing the laws, it talks about the businesses. It talks about how the North and the South both benefited, because remember the 13 colonies were all slaveholding colonies. And I think some places still had slavery. Slavery wasn't even outlawed in DC until maybe the 1800s or something. It just talks about how we as a country literally embraced slavery. Again, in 1776, the founding fathers had an option to bar slavery, but instead they took the economic benefit of slavery and then they made it a life sentence. It shows the process of servitude until a life sentence for Blacks based on that phenotype of the skin. And it's very overwhelming. That chapter was very overwhelming. And that's all I have. Thank you.
All right, Julian, do you want to add in?
Hello. Thank you, Kiara. Yeah, I've been studying the idea of reparations for a while, and I've gotten a few ideas after being exposed to a solid platform that ADOS is, and I see that number one, America wouldn't have any money if not for us. Okay, let me see if I can start a video. I don't know how to do it. Let me see. Wait a minute. Oh, I don't. Oh. Okay. Oh, there. Oh no.
Oh, you're good. We can see you, Julian.
Okay, that's me. Oh goodness. Well, you can see I didn't dress for this. Actually, I'm just on a personal note. I'm doing a little physical therapy. So, and okay. Where's everybody? Oh, there you are. Kind of there. Okay. Yeah. Well, I just want to make the point that this is America would have no money. America, the English colony in America started in Jamestown, 1607, and then reports back and forth between England and Jamestown said the colonists were dying. When they came here, practically everybody was dead. They didn't know how to adapt to this country. They didn't know how to get along with the people here. And in 1619, that's when they brought over Africans. And from that point on, America has flourished off of this slave labor. So they wouldn't have a dime except that they made it by enslaving us, which was a crime against humanity, and a robbery. They stole our labor. They probably even took our ideas to form the Constitution. Africa was a very developed and diverse civilization. There's a fellow on Twitter, I think an ADOS brother, who did a thread of 40 people in America and institutions that became rich and wealthy and everything while we were slaves off of our slavery. So like everything America has, everything people come to America for is a product of the robbery that was done to us. America has no money that they can invest that they didn't get from the seed of our labor. So that's why reparations is a solid justice claim. It's not an imitation or a fantasy or a blending or, it's a solid justice claim. And my advocacy for reparations is that once the debt is paid, once the claim is settled, then the parties who are the people who are party to the claim, the defendant and the plaintiff, you could say, the grievance is settled and they can go on their way in peace. And there's no reason for America or the white or the non-ADOS cultures to think that paying off the debt to ADOS would be a failure or a harm to their society. It's simply a transfer of money to people who deserve the money, which makes everybody feel better. And as Brother Scott noted, there's so many aspects of America that came directly from the Black people that we're not getting paid for, but everybody else is taking advantage of. So if we have the money, there's no reason to think the quality of life in America would go down. It's more likely to improve because people who are talented and enriched or sponsored or talent and resources will produce better product. We have a lot of talent in our community, but we are extremely stripped of resources. So I think reparations is a solution to practically all the social problems in America. That's all I can say for now. I want to get off the screen. I don't think I'm very presentable.
Monia, do you want to add something?
Yes, this is on. Yeah, Darity highlighted in on page 61, and it just talked about the relationships when they started to build these universities in the South, and major slaveholders in the state were the institutions, trustees, and a lot of them went on to be elected officials. So it just shows how we were marginalized in education by the slave owners, marginalized from the political process, as well as any other part of social life. It's like this was a meticulously orchestrated plan. And that's all that I had to add with that. It was just amazing how much power the plantar class had. I guess that's what I'm trying to say, because as Darity emphasized, the northern universities literally wooed the South. Please send your sons here, opposed to sending them to London abroad to study. And again, it talks about the close-knit relationship. You know, King Cotton established New York City. And we're speaking on the need for reparations. I want to bring out the point, simultaneously, while the Civil War was going on, we had race riots that was going on in major cities with the new immigrants, the Irish and Black ADOS Americans. And I think they came here between 1850 and trying to, they left their country, came here, and then they didn't want to fight racism. Basically, we were brutalized by both sides, the North and the South, much like today's political picture. You know, the Republicans, the Democrats, you know, that was the position our people were in with the Republicans and the Democrats, because the Republicans left us no protection. We were just free like a dog, you know, a domesticated dog. And you take a domesticated dog that you've had a pet for maybe 2-3 years, and you decide, I don't want to be a pet owner anymore. So you take this dog across town and just let him go in an open field and walk away. And that's basically what happened to us during Reconstruction. But the period, the context leading up to the Civil War, they created a market and they created a need for us. Of course, that free labor, but we did a lot of domesticated day-to-day activities for the plantar class. And that's all I have.
All right. Does anyone else have anything they want to add to chapter 3? If not, let's move on to chapter 4. And I'll start. I haven't said anything in a while. I actually did start taking notes again on chapter 4. And the first one I have is from page 38. It's regarding a statement in the book where Darity and Mullen said, during the time of England's rule over the 13 colonies, slavery was not a life sentence. An enslaved person could convert to Christianity to gain their freedom. And then my side was, if Christianity was seen as a means of escape from enslavement, can the Black Americans who accepted the religion be considered true Christians? My second point was, today, according to a Pew Research Center's, sorry, my handwriting. According to Pew Research Center's 2014 religious landscape study, almost 80% of Black Americans identify as Christian. But was Christianity our ancestors' attempt at surviving or escaping slavery in America? And if so, what, I don't know, sorry, I was kind of, and my next point was, What religion or religions did enslaved Black Americans practice before converting to Christianity? Layton says that's a lot of questions at once. So the first question is, if Christianity was a means of escape to Black Americans, should our ancestors have been considered true Christians?
Hard question.
All right, well, let's
I'll speak it up. So, the whole point was to basically establish that a Black person, or what they basically were saying without saying was that a Black person couldn't be a true Christian. Yeah. That's what they were saying. That's what they were initially instigating by stating it in such a way that a Black person or a person of color or whatever, a slave, could not be seen as being a true Christian in any sort of way. So even if they converted, it was always like with an asterisk. So that's how they would be seen. And I found that it was also interesting that they said that they just basically got to a point where they couldn't tell the difference between the white servants and the white females. It became too cumbersome for them to try to tell the difference between the two. So since it was so easy to tell by the skin color of the other guys, let's just go ahead and just go ahead and do them anyway. And that I found that interesting, because it's like that translates to today, when we're always translated or seen as the bad guy. Anything that pops on the news that's a murder that happened on, if you Black, they're gonna show his face.
Every time. For a race picture.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So it's like, to me that translated to today, and I just felt like, anyway, that was a good direction I was taking.
Does anyone else have anything they want to add to the first question?
So this is my question. I personally been on the spiritual journey here for a couple of years, but the question that I've had that I ask myself a lot is, I know that I was a Christian because my mother was a Christian, and she was a Christian because her mother was a Christian. And then when we continue to go back, we hit this point. We had to accept Christianity as a means of survival. That's how I understand it. And to me, that's not a choice. You know what I'm saying? That's either you do this or I'm going to shoot you in the face type of thing. And for me, that was the issue. And like I said, I know it might not be like that for everyone, and I know religion is a very sensitive subject. It's a very nuanced conversation. But I know for me personally, it took a choice out of it. And I do feel like the religious context plays a big part in how not only we view politics, but how we view ourselves in it. And I think that's been more detrimental to us than it has helped us over our fight for freedom.
Go ahead, Almonia.
I want to say first off, I am a proud Christian. Okay, I am aware that King James, that wrote the Bible in 1611, was the biggest importer of slaves to the colonies, and that's how the British royal family got their money. I'm aware of that. But my personal relationship and the things I've done has taught me, and the things that I've been through in my personal ADOS struggle allows me to I have friends who are Muslims. I have friends that are, and something else I want to touch on when they get to talking about anti-Semitism, okay? The Arabs are Semites as well. They were slave owners, just like the Jews. And Muslims owned slaves as well. So I'm not gonna say, and it was actually Black people in Africa that sold us. You know, that's why they didn't come looking for us, because they sold us. Again, we were just, I guess, casualties of wars. Then we became contrabands of war. It was always something where we were a piece of currency, basically. And I'm okay in my Christianity, but what I will not allow someone to do is to tell me that my faith, my true and effectual spiritual experience with the God that I have isn't true. See, that's where I draw the line when people telling me about, no, ain't no real Black Christians. But if you read the Bible close enough, which I do, and I read it often, it mentions, you know, that no fornicators, no liars, no thief, no man stealer. What is a man stealer? Oh, that's a slave catcher. You know, I read with a critical eye. I'm okay being a Christian. I don't have a problem with a Muslim, Hindu, because your spiritual experience is not my spiritual experience. And I'm not gonna tell you what you experienced and received from God is any less than what I've experienced. Because I'm gonna tell you, whatever we ADOS have, we know we got a spiritual relationship with a God. Because again, in 1860, collectively, we were homeless, illiterate, and subjected to extreme oppression. And we are still here. And that's all I have with that religious aspect.
Change to yes. Yeah. I want to say this because
First and foremost, I think this is more important than everything. There has to be a respect there, and I say that from me going to whoever, like, cause I through my research, I can't say I'm just a huge proponent of like conversion. So a lot of the stuff that I read, people like, oh, you need to be this, or we need to be that. I don't necessarily believe that personally, but I do feel as though, you know, you connect to what works for you, and not to go too much off in a tangent on the religious aspect. But I know for me, origin and context is basically the founding blocks of everything I understand. Where was it created? Why was it created? And everything from that, I get an understanding. Yeah. And when it goes back to a religious context, when I look at who created the first Bible, why was it created? Why was it instituted? Where was it instituted? Who are the individuals that put it together? What can I prove? Because we know we can't prove everything. We know. But there are a lot of things that you can find, like Alvonia was speaking to earlier. She was talking about that course she took, and she felt cheated. You know, that's how I feel about 90% of everything I read in terms of history. Mm-hmm. And so I look at the context of the first Bible, like she talked about in 1611 with the King James Bible. That was a translation of the first Bible, which to my understanding was created by a man named Constantine. I think the first council was in like 300 something, and the last council was in like 700 something. So reading about him and what he did and why he created all that kind of stuff. So like I said, I try to be very nuanced about it, because the last thing I want to be is disrespectful. And not to say that Alvonia thinks that, and if she do, I apologize. But for me, it's context is important, and more so the application of such. So I look at, you know, for the better part of the last 200 years, I would say the majority of us have been Christian. And I think studies have shown that Black Americans, or ADOS people basically, have the biggest propensity for spirituality than any other group of people. Like, we are the most holiest of holy people in terms of believing, praying, giving, you know, how we adapt the religion into our culture. And I look at our position in America, because like from my understanding of religion and spirituality, it's a tool. Like, you use this to get through your day. You use this to better yourself. It's a moral compass. It's a moral code. And I look at, like, one of the things I know that was hard for me, I never understood as a child why white people and Black people never worship together. yet we read the same books, we believed in the same scriptures, we were supposed to be in it together, yet we're not. And that was something that always bothered me personally. But I look at the advancement of our peoples, and I can't say that Christianity didn't play a part, but I look at in context where we started and where we are, and I think our relation to the dominant society or white people in America is still in the same place as it was then. We just have grown as a country exponentially, but we're still exponentially below where we're started. So in actuality, for me, and it's just my opinion, we haven't really progressed in context of everybody else. Like if you compare us now to us then, some people say we're the same, some people say we're cut off. Kind of depends on who you ask. But when you compare us to the dominant society, to white people, to immigrants even for that matter, I personally, when I look at the data and I look at the metrics, it doesn't look much any different than where we were, 1863, coming out of slavery. But that's subject to discussion. I'm totally up to discuss it.
Hold on. I'm going to make a quick announcement. So it is now 11:05. We are obviously not going to make the entire book today. So if you look in the chat, you'll see a link to RSVP. We'll start the discussion again tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. If you can make it, that is wonderful. If you can't, you on our Twitter page, ADOS in the city on Twitter. I will post the replay there. I'm also going to welcome D. Roberts to the chat. Thank you for coming. I'm going to make a quick, I am going to make a quick statement, and then we'll go to Amy, and then we'll go to our voting. So I'm going to say, I think when we talk about Christianity, there is a difference between spirituality and Christianity, religion. So with my second question, I was asking, before Christianity, what religion did Black Americans practice? What did because if we converted to Christianity, obviously there's some we're converted. Obviously there's some type of religion, some type of sense of spirituality we held before that. So what was that?
Oh, shit. I'm gonna let y'all go.
So I think when we talk about saying that we're Christians, there is a difference in Christianity being what we know to be American Christianity versus Bible taught, Bible led, Christ based Christianity. So, I think this for me in particular, when I consider myself a Christian, I consider myself more of a biblically based, Christ-led, spiritual, faith-based, like that. I wouldn't consider what we know to be American Christianity actually Christianity at all. That's just me. So anyway, Amy has her hand up. So Amy, if you want to jump in, and then so it's Amy, and then Avonia.
I have to go, and I want to say thank you and for letting me participate. Oh shit, was I muted? Anyway, I appreciate you inviting allies to this conversation, and I think it's just important for us to listen and get a better understanding of the issue and how we can be allies. So I appreciate it. I have to go, and I'm anyway. I see Kara on Twitter and follow it, and I'm anyway. Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
All right, take care.
Bye. Have a good day.
All right, you too.
All right, Alvonia. Oh, where'd you go? Okay, go ahead, Alvonia.
Well, my comment is centers around pick up where Scott left off. If you read not just the King James Bible, which was converted, he took, I think, 72 people to convert the universal Catholic canon. But if you go back again, I studied at a Jesuit university and I had to take Catholicism. And one of the things I noticed, justice is a big thing in the Catholic canon. And it speaks of they teach about the universal laws and stuff like that. And that's going back to one thing about the American South and the religious institution. A lot of these pastors were staunch segregationists, and we already know that's code word for racist. And an oxymoron, of course, is a religion of love being ministered or shepherded by people of hate. And that earned humanity, as far as, like you said, we don't worship together. You know, that air in community, that air in humanity with being a racist and a religious person is truly a big as oxymoron. And those are one of the things that I had to spiritually grow to understand. And in my spiritual assessment, the God that I have, he gonna judge that racist, his racist shepherds, because the two can't coexist. Hate and love can't coexist. And I think that's the main thing of Christianity. And if you don't get that part, I don't think it's on the ADOS spirituality. I think there may be an error in humanity on our non-Black Christian. So, and that's all I have. And I don't want, again, we don't have to go, I don't want to go too deep. I've studied the Kemet, I've studied Catholicism, and we have to mention voodoo, and we have to mention hoodoo. Okay? Our people got a spiritual connection. They can't, some of us don't even have privilege to, but it's there. And that's all I'm gonna say. We didn't mention voodoo or hoodoo. So that's all I have.
All right, you want to?
I was just having like a side question on that. Just like, wouldn't that mean that, you know, we would have that spiritual connection regardless of what sort of religion we practice? No, I don't think so.
I do think so.
Honestly, I feel like if you have that spiritual connection, you're gonna have that anyway. Because I honestly feel like, you know, because I'm not a follower of, you know, somebody who grew up in the Christian church and all that, and I don't practice that anymore. But I know that my grandmother had a spiritual connection. You know what I'm saying? So I know that she had something. You know. So, but I also know that whether she was a Christian or not, she still would have had it. And that's what I'm talking about.
So how I understand it, from my spiritual understanding, we had, like he was saying, and I'll go more specifics. We had a spiritual practice before the transatlantic slave trade. And then once the transatlantic slave trade happens, we get to America. We get this other spiritual understanding pushed upon us. And from how I understand it, we incorporated what we already did inside of Christianity. So when you at churches and praise and worship section and people are catching the Holy Ghost, that was something that I understand we did a long time before Christianity was even a thing. Yeah. And so like when I think of church, for me, the understanding behind the church wasn't necessarily this is a whole building, but this is where a bunch of people with a similar spiritual understanding come to community. And now if I'm working on a house, I know a carpenter. And I know because we believe in the same things religiously, I know he's going to give me a fair deal, and I'm going to pay him in a fair wage because that's our moral compass. But I don't think we got that from Christianity. I think we've always had that. Yeah. And we just incorporated our spiritual understanding, whether it was Catholicism or Christianity or Hinduism, etc., etc. I had this professor that I follow pretty tough, James Mullen. And I'm actually, I'm gonna send you this video too if you have time to watch it. I don't know if you know that kind of thing. But he explains it how. I heard him in a lecture one time, and he said, if you give me every, like he had Catholicism, Christianity, Hinduism, Shintoism, all these different religions, these different religions, and he said, I can chronologically put them all in order and show them where they got their inception from a certain spiritual understanding. And I've been following up with him for that. That's been a 5-year journey. And I get to prove him wrong. Because when you look at where all of these different religious
practices... Can you add that to the chat?
That's a long video, but I will add that to the chat.
Add the link to it?
Yeah, okay. He, like I said, he took all of these origins. Like if you think about Christianity, we know that Christianity, the way I understand it, Jesus was 33 years old at the time of crucifixion. Right now it's the year 2020. So this is 2,050 years after the birth of Christ. This is 2020 after that. So you can't have Christianity before you have Christ. Otherwise, it's not Christianity. It can be a similar practice, but you can't be a follower of Christ if Christ hasn't been conceived yet. So before 2,050 years ago, there was no Christianity. So then I began to discuss with what religious practices before that. And that tells you, because I think the first Christian church known to man is the Coptic Church in Ethiopia, from how I understand it. There was no Christian church before this church. And at the particular inception of that church, there had not been a Christ at that point, based on how I understand the doctrine, which is definitely up for discussion. And so basically, after he made that statement, I tried to follow him up. And every time he goes to the origins of where something was created, and then there's research around, like right now. If we say, okay, well, if we find the ADOS can't see, even if nobody talks to Kiara, everybody that's a part of that will say, no, this is who we're working with. This is who we're doing the work. Kiara doesn't have to speak, but everybody that was in Kansas City at the time that was with the movement, they know who did what. So what they do, they go back and they research it, all of the things that were surrounded at that time, like all of the books, all of the scholars. Coinage is a big thing that they use because they like to look at coinage and what was on the coins and that kind of thing. And from my understanding, it was all rooted in one place, and then it just kind of spread from there. How I understand spirituality. But I will drop that link in the chat on Twitter.
All right. Julian, do you want to add in?
Yeah, I would just want to comment on the whole spiritual or religious things. Like, as far as ADOS goes, or the movement of ADOS toward reparations, we can recognize our unity on a spiritual level beyond the divisions of denominations, because as all the holy books talk about the creation story and Adam and Eve in the garden, and well, they somehow, according to science, prospered for 1 million years before anybody wrote a book or knew or thought to write. And so, if God created us in the beginning, then God has been with us all the way and always will be, no matter where we go, what happens. We don't know what will happen after death, but we know that in life, we didn't make the world, we didn't make the trees, but we need all of this to live. And we didn't provide it for ourselves. So that just tells us that there is, if we are intelligent enough, there's an intelligence above ours that gave us all of this. And regardless of how people interpret it or what name they call it, it's all the same. And in the goodness of that sameness is to create a world of justice and peace and prosperity and health. And as we are all different as individuals, we coalesce around different faiths. So all we need to do is respect the differences and not condemn them. Learn from something you're not. Teach what you are. And in that exchange, we maintain a unity. And our struggle here is now as ADOS to receive justice from our captors. And that, I believe, is a goodness that God approves of and seeks, no matter who seeks it. And guess I'm done. Okay, thank you.
I was going to say, I think, again, you have to clarify that Christianity is not spirituality. I think the difference is that spirituality follows a person no matter what religion they practice, because it's a spirit, it's within you. So whether you're a Christian or a Catholic or Jewish or you practice Buddhism or anything else, your spirituality is what's ingrained in you. It's, we, Black Americans joke about, the ancestors, they spoke to me. That's spirituality. When we talk, so I think that's, we have to different, when we say we're Christians, it means we follow the Christian Bible. When we say we're spiritual, that's something different. That's something that's in us. All right, go ahead, Amalia.
I just wanted to comment on, since we're talking about religion, after the war, after Robert E. Lee retired, they asked him about slavery and the war. And his comment was that the position that the white planters had was some type of providence, or it was their religious duty to instruct, and as if slavery was a paternal institution and we would wayward children. That was his, I was trying to find the page when they had him summarize, what he thought about it. And he compared ownership of another human being as being a benevolent act of God or something like that, is pretty much, I just want to say, outrageous. How they attempted to make this a religious act of God. In their minds, the delusion of white supremacy. That's it. That's my last comment.
Does anyone else have anything they want to add? I think we're going to It's 11:22, so we're gonna wrap up our discussion here at this point in chapter 4, and we'll start with chapter 4 tomorrow. So if anyone else has anything they want to add in these next few minutes about what we've been discussing about Black American religion, Black American spirituality, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I got some opinions on that. There's a YouTube channel I like to watch called Home Team, and it focuses on it's called Home Team, the Home Team, and it's a YouTube channel, and it's African history. The guy, he talks about African history, and he actually touched on this. And the thing it is with Christianity, you know, it teaches, you know, a non-violent, you know, approach, you know, even towards, you know, your oppression, you know, turning the other cheek. And I think that, you know, how we embrace that philosophy, even with Dr. Martin Luther King, you know, when he had met with Gandhi, you know, and then he had got on a, you know, a peaceful, non-violent type of a mission, you know. So I think our morality, our moral, the moral superiority, I guess, for lack of better words, that religion gives us, it also stymies us, you know, from fighting as much as we need to fight, because we take a moral high ground, you know, to our oppressors. And, you know, a moral high ground to our oppressors doesn't, you know, get us off from under their boot. But that's what blacks have, us ADOS have, a lot of us are co-opted from religion. You know, when we deal with our oppressors, and the people that's killing and murdering us using a moral high ground. But that doesn't serve our purpose at all. And, you know, that's one of the adverse, you know, effects to us co-opting Christianity.
Yes.
All right, go ahead, Ammonia.
Just in my opinion, with that moral high ground, I don't think it's more or less a moral high ground. I think it's just fear. We seen what happened to King. We seen what happened to X. And once you start talking about that piece of that economic pie, you know, they start neutralizing people. And that's part of it, because we all know that the King family, you know, would receive, you know, a multi-million-dollar judgment against the U.S. government for the death of Dr. King. I think it was in '86 or something. And again, systemic racism has us so disenfranchised. People are afraid. A lot of people are just fearful, especially Black people. You fearful of what? Losing your job, losing friends, losing associates of business. I think I've lost some friends. I lost some Boulay friends when I spoke on the wealth gap in America. Their defense was, you know, that they had wealth. You know, again, I just think it's fear that you're gonna lose what you so hard worked for if you speak out in opposition. And I don't think now I don't think it's more so. I think we take the more high ground to deal with the multi-generational psychological effects of slavery. And that's how we cope with that. But as far as us not retaliating and fighting for justice, that's out of fear. That's out of fear, because I'm like Scott. I'm radical too, and I'm a radical Christian. I've been in the Sunday school class, and I stood up and said, wait a minute, if I wanted to hear Pat Robertson and his white supremacist attitude in church, and I said this, and we're all Black church, because a lot of Blacks in the church, they won't admit it, but they voted for Trump because of the evangelical stance on same-sex marriage and some other things that the quote-unquote fake church stood for as this moral high ground. So again,
situational morality.
oh, they never had none. If you own human Black bodies, you have not a lick of God in you, and I'm standing on it.
Mhm.
Well, on that note, we are going to wrap up for today. It's 11:30, and like I said, we're going to do a hard stop at 11:30. So if you look at the chat, I added the RSVP link to tomorrow's chat. If you can make it to the discussion tomorrow morning, that's wonderful. It's at 9 a.m. same time. If you can't, the replay will be available to watch on YouTube later on that afternoon. I also added our sign up for our newsletter, ADOS KC. It's a weekly newsletter where we share updates about what we've been talking about in the group and current related news in KC, as well as a link to our Saturday meetup. So those two links in the chat. And again, thank you all for joining us today. Thank you all for watching. We will be back here tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. And I hope you all have a wonderful Saturday. And that's it.
All right, y'all.
Night.
Yeah, be cool.
And bye.
I feel like that was going.
Later, everybody.